Hello and welcome or welcome back to the channel. My name is Judy and I love travel, history, and finding out how people live and what makes them tick. We have been visiting Barcelona, a gorgeous city located on Spain's Balearic coast. Like all successful cities, it has changed over time. The most recent revival is probably the beauty treatment large parts of the city received in anticipation of the 1992 Olympic Games. However, the previous revival, in which the city was finally permitted to demolish the Roman era walls and expand outside the perimeter of the original Roman city, was equally, if not more, impressive. The Barcelonans call this new area Eixample, which is a Catalan word that means expansion. Today we're going to visit Barcelona's first suburb, meet two design geniuses, and see what they left behind for us to gawk at, with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Barcelona's economic development was strangled for centuries by it being legally confined behind the Roman imperial era walls, roughly the area marked on the map as Ciutat Vella in green. These walls were designed to protect it from the outside world, but were later repurposed by the authorities of Madrid to keep the Barcelonans, who have a penchant and a desire for independence and troublemaking that carries on to this day, somewhat confined. Their inability to expand beyond the city walls throttled the economic prospects for the city. The government in Madrid, sensing that there was money to be had in tolerating the Barcelonas and allowing them to expand a little bit beyond what had become a dingy, overcrowded, unsanitary medieval city, decided to let them have at it. In the mid-1800s, the city received permission to tear down the walls and expand beyond the perimeter. You can learn more about this in my video blog introducing the city. I'll put the link in the description box below. The big planned expansion was named, logically, if somewhat unpoetically, Eixample, which just means expansion in Catalan. It's the blue area, mostly north and west of the old city. Work began in 1859. Although the Barcelonas might describe themselves as wild romantics, they went this in a very practical manner. The city fathers actually held a contest to see who could come up with the best design for the new suburb. They selected a man named Antoni Rovira i Trias, who started with a central square, the Plaza de Catalunya, and main roads radiating outward from that square. The plan was essentially geometric and looks a great like the original plans from Washington, D.C. Although he won the competition, his plan was actually set aside. A Catalan civil engineer named Ildefons Cerda proposed an alternate plan, which was eventually approved by the central government and imposed on Barcelona. Each plan looked beyond what existed in the old city to the past, essentially in the general direction of the Roman imperial city design, which favored broad, straight streets intersecting its squares. By 1855, Cerdas had actually surveyed and drawn up a topographical plan for the expansion. The first building, called the Casa Batllo, went up in the same area about 5 years later. To prove, however, that no good deed, even a bit of genius, goes unpunished, Rovira i Trias has mostly been forgotten by history. In the end, all he truly had to show for his efforts was this memorial bench and statue. Cerda, who completed the plan, actually lost his inheritance, died heavily in debt, and never got paid for his work on the city. He was a contractor stiffed by the owners. Today, unless you are a city planner or a traveler with an insatiable curiosity itch, like me, you probably never heard of either one. Life truly is not fair. A project of this size, built mostly all at once, drew plenty of architectural talent eager to work. One man does stand out. His name was Antoni Gaudi. He's justifiably famous as an architectural genius and one of the leading proponents of a branch of Art Nouveau style called Catalan Modern. I'll just hit a few of the highlights here, since he's the subject of his own Maker of History video blog on the channel. The link is in the description box below. Gaudi was not born rich. His father was a coppersmith, what we'd call a working man, and I think this background showed up later on in his deliberate promotion of craftsmanship by craftsmen in his architectural work whenever he could do it. Gaudi was interested in architecture and studied at the Provincial School of Architecture right here in Barcelona. As far as I can tell, though, he was never a standout student. He didn't like drawing. He favored working with 3D models, a kind of throwback to his Gothic architectural predecessors. In his youth, as you can see in this photograph, he was quite the dandy. Good-looking, fashionable, a man about town, meticulous in his grooming, his hobbies, the people he met and talked with, even in his dining. I read that dandies were walking works of art, who live every waking moment as if they were part of an Abercrombie and Fitch advertisement. Something happened to change him. He became increasingly religious and more introspective as he grew older. Toward the end of his life, he neglected his dress and appearance, ate frugally, and actually moved his home from Park Güell, which he had helped design, into a workshop attached to his final, most important effort, La Familia. One hideous day, he was walking either to or from church when he was hit by a tram. Because he looked like a bum, passers-by just stepped over him until a kind-hearted police officer piled him into a taxi and took him to a hospital. Unfortunately, he did not survive. You've probably read the story about kings and queens and other people whose greatest desire is to have their hearts buried in their homes. This was more than true of Gaudi. When he was buried, they put his tomb in the crypt of his beloved basilica. Sometimes architects are given free rein. Other times they're given guidelines. That was the case in the first home that we're going to visit here, called Casa Batllo. In the early 1900s, Barcelona was a town on the move, aware of its heritage, proud and eager not just to capitalize on those things, but to display them for everyone to see. The city was actually quite wealthy and full of rich, sophisticated men and women who felt they earned the best and wanted more than just a roof over their heads. They wanted showcase homes to display their wealth and sophistication and, as far as possible, to pay for themselves. Nobody ever got rich by wasting money. The city was a bustling hub of creativity, industry, and culture. This is where, for example, Pablo Picasso first burst onto the art scene. It was home to its own architectural and art style, a local take on Art Nouveau called Catalan modern. Textile mills hummed, people were getting rich, and despite the best efforts of numerous governments going all the way back to the Spanish War of Succession to suppress or eliminate it, Catalan culture and language flourished. Our first stop today is what we could think of as an owner-occupied apartment building. It's called the Casa Batllo, named after the owner, Joseph Batllo, who's shown here with his wife and 4 children in a photo taken around 1900. Batllo actually purchased an existing building, part of a block of buildings, with the intent of tearing it down and starting over. He hired the most famous of the local architects, Antoni Gaudi, to design and supervise the build. Gaudi, who gave signs of being ecologically sensitive before this was a thing, much less popular, convinced the owner to let him remodel instead. This gloriously decorated building, a real standout, was clearly designed to attract attention, and it does so to this day. The family actually lived here until 1954, when it was sold and became a museum and eventually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For all the glossy eye candy and decoration, the building was also quite practical. Casa Batllo was designed partially as a single-family home on the lower floors, but sported rental apartments above the family quarters to pay for it. There are a total of 8 floors. Casa Batllo is a real jaw-dropper with so many eye-catching details that even if you sit at a nearby cafe, and I did, and stare at it through a telephoto lens, you're going to miss most of them. The front facade, as you can see, is heavily decorated and looks quite different from its 2 neighbors. You can see parts of the 2 comparatively bland neighboring buildings in the photo on the left. The center image shows you what the glass walls separating the balconies from the interior space looked like. The rear facade, while a bit more reserved, is also worth a look. It sports open-air balconies for the apartments, as shown here. All of it was decorated, at least partially, with floral motif mosaics, a trademark of the architect. You can see a small example of those tiles in a pool installed on the lowest level opening space at the rear of the building. The interior of Casa Batllo is as innovative and unconventional as any building I've ever seen. Parts of it look like it came out of the Roman Empire, including lots of mosaic tiles. Other parts look like they could have been designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Gaudi designed everything, the building, the fittings, and most of the original furniture. He used flowing organic shapes throughout the design, reflecting his love of nature, and generally avoided straight lines in favor of curves and undulations that reminded him, at least, of living plants. This bench, which appears to be made out of a single piece of wood, is actually composed of several different parts carefully fitted together. It features a dividing armrest and 2 seats facing in opposite directions, breaking away from the conventional linear arrangement we might see in something like a love seat. Gaudi's constant consideration was for comfort and is evident in the ergonomic shape of the backrest and the seats themselves. A great deal of carpentry went into building this piece of furniture, reflecting his interest in promoting local craftsmen. The central staircase was inspired by the spine of some animal, while the walls and ceilings have wave-like designs. The use of natural light is a key feature of the interior, particularly in the light well, which changes color as you go up and down to provide uniform lighting on all the floors. Gaudi was responsible for far more than just the design or the decorations. He was responsible for something practical, the heating and ventilation system. These chimneys, which were necessary for all the fireplaces inside the building, are both practical and quite beautiful, and quite startling to Americans who are used to seeing at best simple, unadorned brick. Built in the days before air conditioning or central heating, the roof housed the many chimneys for the fireplaces that heated the rooms in the apartments below, as well as presenting a gorgeous view for anyone who cared to climb up and look. Of course, your Armchair Traveler did just that. The roof is often interpreted as a dragon's back, with iridescent ceramic tiles resembling scales. A tower crowned by a cross rises from the roof. Some interpret the undulating form you see here as a reference to St. George's dragon, St. George being the patron saint of Catalonia.